podcast. I am your host, as always, Sean Tasse here, joined today with special guest Greg Taylor, who is actually an associate, a selling partner on the Real Collective. And today we're going to talk about country properties, wells, septics, cottages, waterfront, all of the things that you need to know and need to not know. But before we do, as always, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who you might think would be interested. If you'd like to schedule a private consultation with either Greg or myself, you can do so below in the Calendly links, and we'll jump right into it there. Greg, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you're all about, and why you so love country properties.
Well, good Friday afternoon, John. Country properties, there's such a difference between the cities and the countries. I currently live in the country and have a cottage, so I can appreciate when buyers come to us looking for some property, whether it be country, cottage, or a little bit in between. I've typically dealt mostly with the country properties opposed to the city properties. There's a little bit more involved in the country property. So there's a few more inspections, of course. We're going to get into that. A few more things you can do as just the buyer as you're walking around the property to find out, is this going to be a suitable piece of land? Is the house that's sitting on the property the way I want it? There's all kinds of different variables. And we'll dive into that in a bit for sure.
And you are an avid country property liver, Greg. Your big exciting piece this year was a snowmobile. So living that lifestyle, I think, is one thing that's important to you. And like you say, making sure that our clients who want to live that same lifestyle are protected as they go through the process of either buying or selling a house, is important. So I think the first part to talk about is what sort of makes a country property different from a city property. Obviously, there's a couple things, right? There's the land that the property is sitting on, and there's the house itself. A lot of times they're built different or they're older, and then of course it's how they're getting their services, whether it's water, whether it's sewer, whether it's septic, whether it's well, whether it's natural gas, whether it's propane or electric heating or geothermal. These are all things that you don't normally think about when you're buying a property in the city that's, connected to the water, connected to the sewer, has natural gas running to it. The end. Right? It's a little bit more, like you said, a little bit more involved when you're buying a country property. So why don't you take some time and break down to us and for everybody what those differences are that you see?
Absolutely. And, we deal with a lot of people that have been living in the city all their life. They finally decided it's time to, they don't have to go downtown to work anymore. They're working from home. And now they have that time where they say they want that country living, where they come home at night. They've got this massive piece of property, whether it be half an acre or 10 acres. It's just that additional space you have between the homes, the bigger backyards. And so people just think that it's, I like the house, I want to buy it. And, they want to put in an offer. But before we do any of that, typically we want to make sure we protect the clients, because there's wells, as John, you mentioned, there's wells, there's septic systems, and there's, most importantly, even above all that, is sump pumps. And, we can just talk about that massive storm we just had, 3 weeks ago? It's hard to know when we see the weather today, but we had no power in a lot of the country. Now, having no power in the city, it's an inconvenience. I don't have Wi-Fi. I don't have a couple of lights. Big deal, right? You still have water. You still have all the amenities that you have that the city provides. Well, in the country, you don't have water. You don't have and if your sump pump in the basement, if you don't have a backup sump pump, you can actually have water, but it's coming in the basement. It's not coming in through the taps. So there's a lot of things you want to protect yourself with when you're looking at the house. Yeah, it's definitely not drinkable. It's not filtered. So when we go through the house, those are some of the things that I like to point out to the potential buyers, is that, like, let's look at the septic system. Let's start with that one. And let's say, okay, how old is the septic system? Because they don't last forever either. Where's the well situated, and how is the well head situated on the property? Is it flush to the ground, or is it sticking up 1.5 feet from the ground? And we'll get into that a little bit later too, because there's pros and cons to having that. And then, of course, the sump. I like to go into the basement. I look at the sump pump. I pull the cover off. No matter what time of the year it is, pull that cover off and look in and see, is water coming in? there should be some water coming in depending on the time of the year. It's not a bad thing, but is there a backup pump? Is there a backup generator system for that pump? Power goes out and your water's coming in, 40 gallons an hour, and you're out of power for 4 days. It's a lot of gallons coming into your basement.
So here's a question for you. That's a good thing. I always I never think of sump pumps when I'm thinking about country properties, but there's certainly something to consider. Why is it that there's water under the house in a country property?
Well, there's water under every house, except in the city, you divert it to you've got your sewers for the sanitary, then you've got your storm sewers, right? So as we all know, we have weeping tiles at the base of our foundation. That takes all the water away from the house and diverts it to the sewer system. Well, in the country, we don't have that. So the water comes down the side of your foundation, gets into the weeping tiles, and anything that comes under the pad of your foundation or your concrete floor. It funnels it into looks like a big pit in your basement. It's probably about anywhere from, I've seen them as small as a foot to, 2 feet. And they're typically down about 2 feet, 2.5 feet. And the water funnels into there, one stationary spot, and then it pumps it out to the street. You also have to remember your furnaces nowadays, your high efficiency furnaces, they have these little water that you'll see on your furnace. You'll have a hose, it'll go down into the floor drain. We don't have floor drains in the country. So you have this little tube, runs up to your joist, back down into your sump, pumps it into there. Then when your sump pump level comes up, boom, pumps it right back out to the ditch at the front of your house, or wherever it's designed to go away from the house. But typically a good 25 to 30 feet away, because if you're not going to pump it any more than that, it's just coming right back in. It's just a vicious cycle.
So just so that I'm clear and so that other people are clear, I think I know the answer, but I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know if you do or not. But in terms of how a building is built, it's built so that there is a foundation wall, and then there's a foundation floor, and underneath the foundation floor, there's, I guess, runs for water to go, or it's just, I guess there's rocks underneath the foundation floor, right? And the water moves through those rocks. Is that it?
Yeah, and you've got the weeping tile that runs on the outside of the like right at the footings by your foundation, you've got a weeping tile that runs around.
Got it.
So the weeping tile, of course, has the holes, the perforated tile, and it's not really a tile. I don't know what to call it a tile. Weeping hose, let's call it.
Yeah.
So the water gets taken from there to the sump. So it's actually diverting it to one specific spot so it can pump it away, opposed to having it come in multiple spots in the house and then trying to figure out how am I going to get it from 40 feet across my basement floor into the sump pump. So it's actually designed to bring it to one central location.
And that's why when you see some of these old houses that don't have anything, and they've got the dirt floor in the basement and they've got the stone foundation, and you sort of have to duck to go down into the basement, water is going to be coming in on the basement floor, and you sometimes will see little channels which bring it away to a different spot, right?
Yeah. The older homes, I mean, we've been through several in the last couple of months. Sometimes you'll go down and you can actually feel the difference. If it's not finished and everything else, you can actually feel the dampness in the basement because, again, you've got old stone foundations. They could be porous. You could have the floor, which is dirt, which, of course, it's not holding back any water. So you can actually feel a difference in the basement. And you can still finish a basement. You just have to make sure you make the right decisions and get the right people in there to say, okay, this is what we need to do in order to keep the space dry, right? Yeah. It's not undoable. It's something you have to consider if you're buying a country house that doesn't have a finished basement and doesn't have a sump pump system already installed in that property.
Yeah, that's great. So then shifting gears a little bit, talking about water, we can either go next and talk a little bit more about wells, or we can talk about, I guess we talk about water coming into the house as opposed to water going out of the house, which will.
Yeah. And I mean, again, a well inspection, very important to make sure we're not just testing the quality of the water, which is important, of course, because you're checking for E. coli and you're checking for bacteria, or actually the sulfur content, the pH content, all that good stuff that's in the water. We want to make sure it's adequate levels and it's safe to drink. But above all that, we want to make sure we can actually provide enough water to the property, which means, is the well itself sufficient enough to supply water to a household of, say, 4 bedrooms? And they generally call it bedrooms opposed to people because they assume if you've got a 4-bedroom house, you're going to have minimum 3 to 4 people living in that house, maybe 5 or 6. it's all dependent upon that. So if you're having, showers or doing laundries and all that stuff, you want to make sure that your pump is going to be able to remove enough water from the ground to be able to sustain that household. So the test is actually it's actually a three-part test. One, the quality of the water. One, how many gallons per minute the household can extract from the well. And when they do that, they actually have a system where they ran a probe down into the well itself, and it touches the water and it beeps. Then they'll run your water for, it's a good half hour when you're doing a well inspection. And it depends, the well will keep dropping until the well actually comes to the part where it stops. And that tells the well inspector, there's a calculation that they use, how sustainable this water table that you're tapping into is going to be for the home, whether it's going to be suitable or not. And then, of course, the last part is just they check the pump, they check the pressure tank. Because again, we don't rely on the pump to give us pressure. We pressurize a tank, like a propane tank. It looks a little bit like that. We pressurize that it's got a bladder inside it. We pressurize that from the pump, and that gives you a constant, pressure inside the house. And then they'll check the wellhead. They're going to check all the lines. They will check the pump. And very importantly is the wellhead, to make sure that the seals are good, to make sure that there's nothing around the wellhead, because anything that you place on ground level, if the wellhead isn't sealed properly, can get into your well, like fertilizers. I mean, maybe your dog goes over and does its business by it. You certainly don't want that going down your well.
Yeah, that's what that E. coli test is for, right?
Yes. Too much sulfur.
A lot of these houses will also have not just the pressure beside where the water's coming in, but then they also have a bunch of these other machines, and whether they're water softeners or reverse osmosis machines or all that sort of thing. What are the different types of water treatment machines that people will have in their house, and why is it important in some and not as much in others?
Well, probably the most important one is the water softener, because most water around this area is hard water. And people say, well, what's the big deal with hard water? You can still drink it. There's no smell, but it's hard on your appliances, right? So it creates a deposit inside all your lines, inside your coffee maker, inside your dishwasher, if you've got water to your fridge. So it actually can take away the life of some of your appliances. I mean, they're not cheap anymore. I mean, a fridge with water, several $1,000s. You want to make sure it's going to last. So these water softeners allow it so that it can soften up the water before it goes. It hits the softener first, then it goes into the house, so that you're making sure that you're protecting yourself. It also is good for us. You'll find your skin feels softer and everything else, and instead of having that hard water that tends to dry you out a bit.
And I mean, when I think of hard water, I think of ice. What is it in water that actually makes it hard? Is it some chemical or some extra?
I'm not 100%, but I know there is some iron content in our water, because I mean, a lot of times people notice, they go to a house in the country and they'll see the stains on the side of the water where people have watered their plants. It's actually rust. It's the iron in the water that's sitting on the side of the house, and it begins to create like a rusty look on the house. Again, it's in water, period, but we just want to make sure that we're at the right levels, that we're not causing ourselves any ill will towards drinking water that's not safe. So we do recommend you get the water tested, even though you test it before you purchase the property. Continue to test your water as you go down the road, because things change, right? And wells could become bad.
I think the municipality offers free testing kits to anybody who wants them, right? So
and they offer that. I believe it's still a free test period. All you have to do is just bring them the water, and again, important that you don't take it from a tap, take it right from the source, because you can get a false reading as well. You could have a tap that's got, by chance, it's the kitchen tap, and somebody hit the end of the faucet on some raw chicken just before and it's there. So you want to take your water source, or take the water sample right from the source, so right where it comes into the house from the pressure tank. Take your sample there, bring it to the municipality. Just make sure that it's still safe for you to drink. That's all. Yeah,
and we've seen it before, where we see yellowing on the inside of a sink or a bathtub or whatever, and that's typical. Okay, that makes sense. That's the iron that does that. Great. And then just before we break here, I just want to pick your brain a little bit as well about septics. Those are the hot topics for sure. So what's important to you when you're going with a client and you're looking at a house and it has a septic system in it?
So the first thing I ask, if I have a chance to even talk to the listing agent, is if the septic's been pumped recently, because one of the biggest detriments to a septic system is if you allow the sediment, or what they call the sludge, to actually get into the weeping beds. So if you're pumping your system, which they do recommend about every 3 to 5 years, if you're pumping it every 3 to 5 years, you're doing your due diligence to maintain that part of the system. A good way to sort of tell that is if you can actually find the septic heads. Like there should be some, at least minimum 2 heads that you'll see on the property. The newer ones you'll find are green. The older ones are concrete. If they're not there and they're buried and they've got, looks like grass has been growing there for 20 years, or there's shrubs over top of it, it's a pretty good chance they weren't pumping it. The other thing I like to look for is lots of trees around where the septic bed is. Like, so basically it goes into a primary and secondary tank, and then the liquids get pumped into what we call a weeping bed. And that's where the water gets dispersed. Well, if you've got a lot of trees in your property and a lot of trees actually on the weeping bed, those roots can get into the holes in these weeping tiles and start to plug them up. And it can make a weeping tiles fail prematurely, right? So you want to make sure when I'm looking at a property, I find the septic system, and then you can pretty well tell, because there's always a bit of you can always see like a rounding section where it's flat and then it drops down on the sides and on the back. That's usually, I'll say usually, the weeping bed. And then I'll just look around and see, hey, is there a lot of trees? Is there, what's growing around it? If there's nothing, then that's a good sign. And make sure that there's no cars parked back there. You can't drive over a weeping bed. That's a good way to destroy it, because you just crush all the tiles. So a lot of visual things that we can do prior to, having an actual full inspection done. But as an agent, I like to just do my visual checks just to see what we're looking at when we get to a property.
Now, I've heard numbers being thrown around when people say, oh, well, if you've got to replace your well, it's something like, 10 to 15 grand. And if you need to replace your septic, it's, 30 to 40. Are those pretty basic in terms of, obviously each situation is going to be a little bit different. But if you were to install a brand new septic system, I guess it depends on the size of the house, how far stuff away is from this, and all that. There's a bunch of things to calculate for sure. But if you're putting in a brand new well and a brand new septic, and you put aside, let's say, $50,000 to do that, that sounds pretty close.
You're close. Yeah, you're close. It's all going to depend on how and where as well. I have the experience with that too, because we did put a septic in this house.
Right.
And we chose, and there's options, like there's lots of options that you can do. There's lots of products you can buy, but there's also options when you're doing it. So it's kind of a bit of like building a building. It's not just you phone up your local guy and he comes and put it in. No, you actually have to call a company. They come in and they do a land survey for the system. And they're going to say, this is where this goes and this is where that goes. Now, you can make recommendations where you want stuff. For instance, I wanted my weeping tiles at the back of our property. I didn't want them near the front because I didn't want to cut down all these trees. I bought the country property because I wanted some trees.
Sure.
So we wanted to pump it to the back of the property. So you have to pay for that inspection and you have to pay for those drawings. Well, then you have to take those to the municipality. Then they have to approve it and they have to submit you have to get a permit for it. So you're probably around $2,500, Sean, just before you even start digging. Right.
And red tape. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then our system was $40,000. So we were all in around 43. But like I said, we did a few small changes. Pumping it to the back meant a little bit more. Instead of it a gravity feed, there's another pump, but systems are not as like they used to be. We have 3 pumps. We have a control panel. We've got alarms that'll go off. I mean, it's all for the sake of flushing.
Yeah, run the whole thing from your phone, Bluetooth, everything. It's a good update. So this is great. This is a super informative first half. We're going to take a quick break, have a look at some more information in the second half, and talk a little bit more about land as well as sort of waterfront properties, cottage properties, and the particularities there. So stick around, guys. As always, feel free to hit that like button on this video. Share this with anybody who you think might get some value, who might be looking for a country property or a cottage property. and subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with all of the brand new listing videos before they hit MLS. You can obviously check this out on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, you get to see our wonderful faces. And if you'd like to schedule a consultation with either Greg or myself, you can do so below in the Calendly links. We'll catch you on the flip side.
This episode of the Real Collective podcast is brought to you by Real Collective. Real Collective brings together best-in-class real estate agents and collective experts in the field to deliver the best possible service to our clients. We govern ourselves with honesty, open-mindedness, and compassion. With diverse skill sets, our agents are able to better serve a wide array of clients, including first-time buyers, first-time sellers, transferees, estate sales, investors, and rural, vacation, and luxury properties. Authenticity and transparency are pillars of our process, which allows us to put our clients at the center of everything we do. Our years of experience and knowledge allow us to deliver prestigious service and optimal results. If you are interested in buying or selling your home, contact us today at realcollective.ca.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Real Collective podcast. I hope you like that interlude in the middle. As always, if you are liking what you're seeing, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends, download us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching us on YouTube, thanks so much. Schedule an appointment with Greg and I down below with our Calendly links. And let's jump right back into it, Greg. Talk a little bit now, shifting gears from specific country properties to what you're finding when you're helping people either buy a cottage, waterfront property, or even just straight up vacant land.
Yeah, I mean, when you're buying a cottage property, typically you're not. I mean, it's not the same usage, of course, because we're not 12 months a year. Most people are around here. It's 3-season cottages. They're not maybe even fully insulated. Some don't have a heat source. So the septic systems tend to last a little bit longer. I know that I sold a cottage last fall, and the septic system was a 1963, and it's still the original system. And when we had it inspected, the inspector said, because they've been pumping it regularly, there's no trees plugging the weeping tiles, because that's what they do. They dig up right in your grass looking at the tiles, and they put cameras down there. So it was still in good shape, and maybe they get another 10 years out of it. So, it all depends on the wear and tear, and I don't want to get into that anymore, but how you use your system. You got to be careful. There's still products you can't flush down. And again, when you come from the city, you floss your teeth, you put the dental floss in the toilet and you flush it down. That's a big no-no. That's one of the horrible things to stick in your system, because the system is designed to break down the bacterias. So there's good and bad bacteria in your tank. It breaks everything down and tries to change it back to a more natural source. And I'm not going to get into how it works, because there's some with peat moss or some with sponges. By the time it leaves the weeping tiles, the water should be it will be clear. And I've heard some people say it's like you could swim in it. I'm not going to swim in it, but that's what some are saying. So when you start flushing products into the toilet that don't break down, tinfoil, dental floss, our own hair, your wife or you have long hair, and you brush your hair and you get this wad of hair, throw it in the garbage. Don't put it in your toilet. It's not going to degrade. It's not going to break down. Feminine products, all that stuff. It's just stick that into the garbage can.
What about toenails? Because I feel like that's a thing people often do into the toilet.
I mean, it's such a small product. It's probably not going to be the end of the world. But they say coffee grains shouldn't be put into the septic system. So, it's a difference. And I recommend everybody do some research if they're buying a country property, or if they bought a country property. Even if you own a country property and you don't know, do some research, talk to some professionals, and get the right information. This is stuff that I've been told over the years. Whether it's 100% accurate, I felt true to it. It makes sense, a lot of it. If it doesn't break down, I'm not going to put it in there. But you shouldn't put no products with bleach, because that destroys the good bacteria. It kills the good bacteria in your septic system, so it doesn't do its job.
Right. I'm joking about toenails. I'm thinking the only thing that's going down into the septic system is the stuff that we flush down the toilet. But of course, it's also the stuff, you say coffee grains, it's also the stuff that falls off the dishes that we're washing in the sink. right?
Yeah.
So you have to take that into account as well. It's not just what flushes down the toilet or what goes down the shower if you've got a shower on.
No, and so if you're present for the septic inspection, which I recommend everybody is, it's not pleasant because they're going to pull the tanks and there's going to be a scent, but you know what? Put a mask on, deal with it for half an hour. But when you look down into the tank, there's three things you'll have in there. One is going to be the sludge on the bottom, and that's the stuff, the waste that's going to sit in the bottom, and that's what you're going to pump out every 3 to 5 years. Then you've got a water base, and that's the stuff that's separated from the two, and that's what's going to actually go into the secondary tank and into the third prime, and so on and so forth. But right on top, you're going to see this really dirty, disgusting, and it's called scum. And that's exactly what it looks like. And that's all the stuff that, you're right, Sean, oils from when you're cooking that get put into the sink, butters, greasy sauces, you get a Alfredo sauce or something, and you pour the rest down the sink or into the toilet and flush it down. That sits on top, and that creates an oil layer. There's nothing wrong with having it. Everyone's going to have it. But that's where all that stuff's going to sit that I told you not to flush down your toilet, like the dental flosses and all that. So if you want your septic pumping guy to know what you're doing in your house, so you don't want to be embarrassed.
I get what you're referring to. Let's keep talking about cottages, about country properties, and about waterfront. What are some of the limitations when somebody's buying a waterfront property that they have to take into account? I know, for example, for our place, we don't have a great view from the deck to the water, and we want to open it up and take down some of the trees, especially the ones that are at the water line. What are some of the limitations there?
I think you're always supposed to look for and get permits when you're cutting trees down. But first and foremost, I don't know about all areas, but our cottage is up in the Perth area. So we're still in the Ontario side, up in the Tay Valley area. And we wanted to put a deck on the front of our cottage to have a better view of the lake. And they stopped us from going any closer than 100 feet to the shoreline. So where the closest part of the water came to the property, I had to be 100 feet back from there in order to start the deck. Like, they wouldn't allow us to put it on the cottage and come out. Now, I guess I could put a patio down, but that would have to be on ground level. So there's limitations. If you want to put up a shed, the sheds aren't supposed to be close to the water line either. So you really have to make sure that you ask the right questions, because you don't want to build something and have to tear it down and move it and whatnot. That's just too much money and too much time, to try to do that.
My rudimentary understanding has to do with what they call riparian rights. And so that has to do with how close you're allowed to put something to the water because of its potential to, disturb the waterfront, disturb that line. And that, if I remember from my real estate courses, this is going back a decade, is federally monitored by like the Oceans and Fisheries thought process. So my understanding is that you have to be so far back from the water before you start to disturb anything around it. So you can't really bring sand in and try and make a beach that doesn't exist, right?
And I've heard, and I've never seen it, but I've heard that planes do aerial photography all the time to make sure people aren't disturbing that, because it is the ecosystem that, the little animals that are living on your shoreline. And I mean, that's why you moved to the country, or that's why you went, to a cottage land. If you don't want bugs and you don't want little muskrats, you don't want any of that, then you probably shouldn't be there, because you're in their territory. We're invading them, not the opposite. So, I mean, we don't want to disturb them. If it's a danger, then of course we're going to ask for some permissions to fix something or to change something. But I mean, if a little muskrat swims across where you normally swim during the day, then just take a picture of them, put it on Instagram or something.
If you ask my family, they will tell you of the dangers of dock spiders and how they all need to be burnt to the ground.
Nobody likes those. Nobody likes those. No, those are one thing that, and they do hurt if they bite. So
you know what? They don't flinch me. We've got a floating dock, and sometimes because I guess they can run on the top of the water, and so when you get on the dock, you tilt it one way, and they all show up on the top of it, and it doesn't bother me at all. I'll play a game where I'm kicking them off, and then they have to run back to shore. But everybody else is like, nope, Sean, you're the first one on the floating dock.
Hey, you're not flicking that to the kids, are you?
Oh yeah, you know what? They don't. Yeah. causing.
So I guess what I should say to reiterate the whole 100-foot back is that if you see a cottage that's like, within 30 feet of the shoreline that's, been there since 1960, a lot of that stuff gets grandfathered in. They're not going to ask you to, once you've bought that cottage, to move it.
Right.
But if you want to do any additions or anything else, or if you actually tore the whole cottage down, there's a chance maybe you don't get a permit to put it back there. Would be a lot of stuff I'd make sure I'd ask the municipality if I bought an older cottage and I wanted to put my house there, my retirement home. I always tell my clients, make sure you do your due diligence to make sure they're going to allow for that, because you don't want to spend $300,000, $400,000, $600,000 on an old cottage, tear it down and be told now you can't build your house that you wanted. So now you just got a trailer on there and it's just not what you want. So
yeah, fair enough. Good. And then shifting gears lastly into buying lots. Oftentimes, sometimes you'll buy lots that are sort of in the city, but a lot of the times people are buying lots and they're either in sort of estate, 2-acre parcels in an estate. And the idea is they're going to build a house there. Is there anything in particular that you're looking for that's over and above what you would normally consider when you're just buying a straight up piece of land in the country?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things to consider, because you want to make sure that you're investing your money on a piece of property. Find out what's allowed. Sometimes there's a minimum, 2,000 square foot bungalow, 2,500 square foot 2-story. Exterior products, no vinyl siding is allowed here. It either has to be stone or stucco, or, some form of a product that's not vinyl siding. Some will say a setback of a certain amount, how far away you have to be from the road. So, if you've got a huge property and it's 100-foot setback and you're old and you don't want to be doing driveway maintenance, maybe that's not the right area to be in. There's a whole different whack of things. Some people will say that you buy a property, you have to build within a certain period of time. So, you buy this property now because it's a better price, or you thought it was a really good deal, but you're not wanting to build for 5 years. They say you have to build within the 2 years of ownership. You have to start to build. There's all kinds of different small little details, and you want to make sure you read that fine print, because if it's not going to fit their criteria of what they want to do for this property, that's not the right property.
Yeah, no, those are good things to take into consideration.
Sorry, I forgot to say, some won't let you clear the whole land. They'll only let you clear 50% of it, and you have to keep the other 50. So if you wanted this massive house with this huge opening area in the back to see, and again, just make sure you read the fine print and find out all what's allowed and what's not allowed, I guess is more important.
Yeah, no, that's it's good, because a lot of times you look, you say, hey, it's a blank piece of land, I can just do what I want with it, but there are limitations, and of course,
and when I want.
Well, yeah, and thinking about the life that you're going to live in the house when it's done, and talking, like you said, about snow removal, or talking about that's a bit, if you got 5 acres, you might be cutting a lot of grass. Is that the style of life that you want to live? That's it's good to have the conversations with our clients far in advance of when they actually go to buy that property, so you can either steer them in the right direction or steer them away from the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, and especially it's more important to, especially if it's in, like you mentioned, a subdivision, Sean, because nobody wants to build, and the reason is you don't want to build a house on either side of this property, and then the guy in the middle, he's not going to build for 10 years, and that property is going to get unwildly with roots and everything's going to grow wild in there, and it's just going to blow into his yard. So they have an aesthetic that they want to see, and that's how they want to do it. So we have to be really careful. That's all.
It's really good to have you on, Greg. It's you said off camera, but I'll reiterate it for everybody, that this is what gets you going. You can talk about this for hours and hours, and you can see that it's the part that you really enjoy. It sounds to me like it's absolutely your wheelhouse, and that's you are our team expert when it comes to country properties, well, septic, waterfront, et cetera, et cetera. So it's good to have you on and to break all this down. Hopefully a lot of people will get some information from it. People can find you obviously on our website, social media. They can call you directly on your phone. All your information there is easy to come by. If you'd like, of course, guys, to schedule a direct appointment with Greg to have unpack a conversation about what you're looking for in your next country property, you can do so with the calendar link below. If you want to have a conversation with me, same place. As always, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anybody who's interested. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, thank you. If you want to see what our faces are doing when we're having these conversations, you can also check us out on YouTube. And until next time, keep it real.
Collective.